Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, as you know, I'm Mark McCullough, aka the Hat. As you see, those of you who see me on Slack, yes, just look for the Hat avatar. That really is what I look like. Even those who are trying to find me in person, I tell them look for the Hat. So going on. First, some ground rules. Go on. So first, some ground rules, and go on. I can listen to myself talk anytime I want. I don't need an audience for that. So if you have a question, if something pokes your curiosity, stop me, interrupt, ask your question. Otherwise, if you wait for me to come in for a natural landing, I'm going to be 10 slides down the road and you'll have forgotten what it was you wanted to ask me about, or I've moved on to a different topic. So bring it up. Don't be afraid. Okay, let's move on. So why do we document? We've got a few reasons why we write documentation. These are just a few of the major reasons. Now, since we have at least one person here who's involved in government, you may have heard of the infamous NIST SP 800-53. Moving on. NIST SP 800-53 includes a requirement called SA5. Can you advance? This is the text. Yeah. This is the text of SA5. It's a mouthful. Do I expect you to know what this means? No. So let's translate this to plain English. Go on. This is the entire requirement in plain English. Keep going. So why do we really document? It's because documenting is the right thing to do. Keep going. And because at times we take vacations. We never want to be interrupted on our vacations. And if we write better documentation, we can minimize the interruptions. Go on. But equally important, sooner or later, you're going to leave your position for whatever reason. You find a newer, better position, you retire, or get promoted out of your current role. And your successor may know where you live. I've handed Splunk instances over to people who knew where I lived. And I was okay with that fact because I wrote good documentation. Keep going. So what do we do? What are we trying to do? And fundamentally, what we're trying to do is create the service runbook. Keep going. Now, a service runbook, the goal of it is, as it says here, to have enough detail to rebuild the entire infrastructure. No passwords, not the actual content of the config files that you are storing in Git. You are storing your config files in Git, right? Keep going. So what do we put into it? Well, there's a whole bunch of sections. We're going to go through this. First is the overview. This is a short section. What is this thing? It's Splunk. What is its value in the organization? Now, that may seem obvious, but a lot of shops may have more than one Splunk infrastructure. I've been at clients where there was 4 or 5 different instances of Splunk completely disconnected except in license. And so the overview section specified how Splunk served that part of the organization, what role it played, how it helped them. Keep going. So the next major section is the usage. One of the most common mistakes is to only include the user interface. No, include even the administrative interfaces. This is all the URLs that you use. If you left the GUI on the deployment server, list what the deployment server URL is. Did we put that on 8000, 8443, or do we point it in with a load balancer and put it on 443? Document the URLs. Keep going. Now, the architecture section is a big section. And as you see here, there's a lot of subsections that are each of them rather important. We're going to go through each one of those. But before I get into that, the architecture of a system can be mostly rediscovered through something called system archaeology. And like traditional archaeology, you're going to bring a brush, a shovel, and plenty of string to mark it off. But system archaeology is bad. We shouldn't have to do that. But there is one thing that cannot be part of this, that cannot be rediscovered through system archaeology. Keep on going. And those are the key assumptions that are made. Every architecture makes assumptions. Those assumptions can include service level agreements, but they can also include fundamental things, assumptions about the nature of how it is deployed and the user audience. These are just some examples. For example, I've worked in some shops where a key assumption was that the user community that was creating alerts was comfortable working at the configuration file level, and thus were expected to write all of their saved searches directly into Git repos as a savedsearches.com. We didn't even enable the ability to create alerts by Google. They had to do it via savedsearches.com. That was a core assumption. May sound weird, but we have reasons behind it. Your service level agreement assumptions can have a fundamental decision on what kind of infrastructure you have. If you have certain kinds of assumptions in your service levels, that can literally translate to how big of a search head cluster, or do I use a search head cluster? What kind of indexer cluster we're deploying? Keep going. Now, the systems, you may say, well, why would I document these? This is a source of record. Now, some of you have heard me talk, may have seen me rant about source of record versus source of truth. This is the approved list of what is actually in the Splunk infrastructure. If you ever work in a shop that is FDA validated, you actually have to put this in. It's one of the requirements to get validated. With all of the details that I've listed here. So you list for every system, what is the host name? If there's any DNS aliases, what role, how many CPU, RAM, storage. Now, you may say, well, this is all well good, but I'm in AWS. I don't have to list the CPU, RAM, and storage. That's defined by my instance type. Keep going. Exactly. So if it's defined by instance type, you put it into the type. You document. This is the type we use. Now, some of you are saying, but I'm changing my types all the time. Yes. So update your documentation when you change instance type. The goal here is to provide enough information so that you know the key details. Notice in this example, I emphasize that the indexer line, well, the second server row, uses ephemeral storage. That's the kind of note that you want to remember. Keep going. Network connectivity. This is an area where a lot of people forget, but can be really important. Often Splunk gets special firewall rules that are created by the firewall admin team. And if you don't remember that those exist, that can cause a lot of problems. Firewall teams are often very grouchy when you call them into outage calls because you suspect that the firewall is not working the way you want. So document the rules to make them less grouchy at you. Now, key ports, the important thing is, are you using non-standard ports? If you're using 9997 for your forwarder, just reference that. But if you're using 9998 instead, definitely reference that. For diagram, I recommend cheating. I just use the standard Appleur template diagram of here is a standard diagram. The audience for this is actually not Splunk admins. It is the auditor who is also reading the documentation. Keep going. Now, IAM, Identity and Access Management. When I'm doing infrastructure, there's always going to be the question, how do people request access to this? This is an area that is often saved as tribal knowledge. But the point of the service runbook is to reduce or eliminate tribal knowledge. So you want to reference, include, how do people request access? What is the approved method for getting an account in Splunk or changing their access levels in Splunk? Are there specifics for your organization? For example, if you're an academic facility, you might be using a tool called Grouper to manage group membership. And that might be how people are supposed to update the access laws. That's a non-standard thing that a John Doe off the street won't know. So you document that. Keep going. Service configuration. This is a section that definitely needs some turn feeding. A lot of us are creating custom apps in Splunk. Now, those apps may be very simple, such as my Z default deploy that I put on every universal folder that has only a deployment client.conf in it of what is my standard deployment server. Or it might be very complex with multiple SIG searches, data models, and XML dashboards. Whatever it is, if you're building custom apps, you should document it, those apps, and have pointers to them from your service runbook. Those custom apps documentation should list where they get applied. Some custom apps will be applied only to universal forwarders. Some will only be applied to search heads. Others might only be applied to the indexers, and so on. If you're using Splunk-based, pretty obvious. I've seen a lot of cases where Splunk-based apps were included, but people didn't realize why they were using them. And so 4 or 5 years later, they were still adding a Splunk-based app that they were no longer using. This is a point to document. We are using this for this reason, so that you can understand, like the key assumption, when that reason is no longer valid. There's the old parable of a new couple that are married. The wife cooks a beef roast, and she cuts off the tip of the roast. And the husband says, "Why did you do that?" "I don't know. My mother always used to do that." So they ask the mother, "Why do you cut the tip off the roast?" "I don't know. My mother used to do that." So they ask the grandmother, "Why'd you do that?" "Well, my pan was too small to fit the whole roast, so I cut off the tip to make it fit." Assumptions are like that. It's about, there are things that may have been valid and legitimate at the time, but underlying infrastructure changes. And so you need to remember, when do things change in a way such that your underlying assumptions no longer apply? And so you need to know what is appropriate for that. That's why we are documenting these things. Keep going. Now, the maintenance section is another big section that's broken down into several sections. Let's go through them real quick. Keep going. Training. You may have a deal with Splunk or another company that provides free or reduced cost training in Splunk. So give pointers to it. New people may want pointers to the Splunk Quick Reference PDF. Or they may want pointers to forums like this one. Give pointers to these things. Keep going. Support. The goal here is what is the special details needed to get that ticketed? I often will include the entitlement numbers in this, so that I don't have to go and look them up in weird places. I know exactly where to go for those. Keep going. Now, standard procedures. This is an area that when you start, it's going to be almost empty. Every time I create a procedure that I'm going to do a lot, I'm going to create a page. Some people will call these KB articles. The goal is to focus on local procedures and organization-specific knowledge, not docs. But there will be times that you will write something where you are combining 3 or 4 or 5 different docs pages together that are complex in how you have to start on this doc, pause at this point, pull in this other doc, and run its procedure, and then go back to the first document, and then go to a third document. Those of you who have tried to read docs.splunk.com's patching order for search head cluster with indexed cluster know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's keep going. This is an example of a standard procedure that I have written. This is an actual screenshot of our Confluence. Yes, I will admit, I am at SLAC. I wrote a procedure of what I expect myself, or if I'm on vacation, the person covering for me, to do every day. This procedure can be done in about 3 minutes. The weekly procedure takes an additional 5 minutes, typically. But I've documented it and said, this is what we expect. This is our agreed upon process. Keep going. This is another procedure. Adding a new HEC input is a common thing for people to do. Now you may say, well, this is pretty much vanilla, but there is two bits of domain-specific knowledge. One, the index that we assign it to first. It says here that we always assign it to the test index to test the input first. That's organization-specific information. I also specify the exact app and file name that they are to add the entry to, and say, you are to do it this way. So you notice here this is a little bit of a meism. I do include enough detail so that even an amateur at clusters can correctly apply these configurations. Known issues is similar to standard procedures, but it's focused on problem solving. My rule of thumb on known issues is if it takes me more than about 10 or 15 minutes, I create a page on it. This is an area where those who like KB articles are very used to this concept. Let's go on. This is an example of one of my known issues pages. This one took me well over 45 minutes to figure out the solution. The solution was fix my typo in my configuration files of where my certificate lived. So not a hard thing to solve, but it was tricky. It wasn't clear in the logs and in the output as to what the problem was. So I documented it. And then when it happened again, 1 year later, when my certificate had to be renewed, and I again typoed the location to the certificate, I was able to very quickly find the solution and solve it because it was written down. Keep going. Here's another example that emphasizes how simple your solutions may end up being. I was ingesting a JSON source type that had over 50,000 fields in it. I wish I was joking. No, it was not index time extraction. But only some of the fields were being automatically extracted. So I found the solution after a long time of hunting, and I documented it. Keep going. Now, we promised we'd talk about alerts. So let's talk about alerts. And the first question on alert, keep going, is who is the audience for the documentation? The answer really is anyone who receives or sees the alert. So you need to always keep in mind anything you write in that documentation, even at those people. You might have additional documentation aimed at managers, but make sure you can answer the 4 questions those people have. Keep going. They have 4 questions. The first one is, what is this thing? Why does it matter which is also translated to, why are you paging me at 2 in the morning? What am I supposed to do when I get this? Or is this just a meaningless alert that is just going to mess up my metrics on my solution time? And how do I know I did it right? Let's talk about these. Go on. What is the alert? Write an explanation, give information that tells someone what this alert actually is. Let's take a look at an example. Go on. This is an actual alert documentation I've got. And you see, I highlight very clearly, this is what this alert is saying. When this alert fires, what is it telling you? I had a universal forwarder that has stopped reporting in. And at the same time, now this is a meism. I tend to combine the what it is and why does it matter into one section. As long as you answered both questions, that's okay. I'm also saying we're no longer getting key data from the host. So that means that's what the impact is. Okay. You also notice that I give some information about my acceptable thresholds to emphasize, hey, I've set my threshold such that if it's undergoing most kinds of routine maintenance, it's not going to fire this alert. Let's go on. Let's take a look at another example. I like this example because this is an example of something a lot of people don't think about as something alert worthy. But you have this huge, why do we care? Why is this worthy of being an alert? Explanation in this. And so we documented this very clearly for the person who receives it to understand, yes, it matters, and the security team cares that you have a system that hasn't been rebooted in 2 years. Because it means you haven't activated the kernel patches that have been made available. Even if you've installed the kernel RPMs, you're still running the old kernel. Because we're working on Red Hat and not recent versions of Ubuntu that have the live kernel patch. Let's keep going. Many people worry first and foremost about what do I do when I get this alert? And this is the section where you document that. Go on. Playing off the forwarder's gone dark alert, this is actually what I've written for what are you supposed to do? Now, some of you will look at this and say, but you're supposed to restart the universal forwarder by systemd, not by direct Splunk restart. This documentation was written and last updated when the majority of our universal forwarders were running RHEL 6, no systemd. So yes, it really was accurate for the alert response we had at that time. So put down whatever it is that you want people to do. You'll get a lot of oddities of what you need is done. Go on. So the validations part of this documentation is all about, did I do it right? Junior people always want to know, did I do this right? Am I making a mistake? I need someone to check my work. So give them a way to check their work. The least preferred option is see if the alert self-clears. That's the least preferred option. Give them a positive method to check. Go on. Now, in this example, the positive check is to rerun the same search that generates the alert and see if the host disappears from the alert. So that's not just waiting for the alert to clear. That's an explicit, we're rerunning the same check. And it might be that a lot of your validations follow a similar pattern as this. That's okay. Go on. This is an example of an entire alert documentation all together in one. This alert documentation doesn't have to be that long, but this is a really critical alert for my organization. In Windows, there are a list of groups that If anyone is added to that group, they have a huge level of access. Domain admins is only the best known of those groups. There's also enterprise admins, schema admins, and there are domain-specific groups. So we created an alert for any time someone was added to one of these groups. Immediate alert. And then we wrote a detailed response of what you are supposed to do. Now, this is where I start talking a little bit about the story where I was at a client as a consultant where we needed to revise some of the alerts. Management was very nervous about this. They didn't like the idea of just coming up with alerts that was just going to mess up their queues, not be actionable. I said, hold on. I'm not going to build technical alerts. I'm going to write documentation. And so I wrote a list of I think it was 19 recommended alerts. What the alert was, why I felt it mattered to the organization. And that's all I wrote. Just those two stanzas. Management looked at it, came back and said, I approve of every single one of these, and here's an additional one and why it matters to our organization. Go forth. Each one of them, they immediately understood what it was and why it mattered, and that made the buy-in much easier. And this is why we get into that process. So when it comes to the process, let's talk about some tips. Keep going. When it comes to writing documentation, I want you to notice what isn't listed. Nowhere do I tell people, write documentation. An internationally published short story author and professional editor likes to call the first draft of any written work the vomit draft. You're spewing words out over the page. When it comes to documentation, I need to see the vomit draft. Get your notes out there. But then, like preparing a short story or a novel, come back and edit. Don't hide that first draft from your peers. Get it in front of them. Let them see your ugly work. Let them see what you're thinking, what you're writing. They'll improve the notes that you've written down, and someone else will come in and add more notes. Make it a cycle. Keep going. So when it comes to documentation,
Sorry.
down.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying. It's really slow. Just a second. Oh, man. Oops. I don't know. It's not going to the next slide. So, sorry. There we go.
Okay, there we go. So when it comes to documentation, remember how I talked about the story of writing documentation first. Make this your official process. That every new alert, you write the documentation and you present it to the group that's going to receive the alert and get their sign off. Because they never want to see an alert that they don't know what to do with. So they're going to want to know what it is, why it matters, and what are they supposed to do? And how do they know they did it right? Remember, SOC analysts include some fairly junior staff. There may be tier 1 people who are literally at the level of, there's a manual. They can't do anything much higher than follow a pre-written script. That's your SOC 1 analyst. The SOC 2 analyst can read the fine manual at varying levels of vagueness. So in your documentation appropriately. Only build the actual alert after the documentation is finished. A lot of shops will say, I'm going to build this alert right now. I'll come back later and write the documentation. A year later, they don't have even a first pass on it because they got called away on another set. Write the documentation first. Keep going. Now, another common mistake that I see is trying to have a formal gatekeeper or guardian in front of documentation. Anyone who gets the alert should be an approved editor. They may encounter this alert at 2 in the morning when you're asleep or you're on vacation, and then they hit upon an idea that improves the evaluation of that alert, a trick that you hadn't thought of, or then they say, this was a little unclear to me. This is what I did, and this is how this is how will help us respond to this alert a little cleaner. Let them update the documentation. Keep going. But the other thing to do is you need to have a process where you are regularly reviewing those alerts. Even if you're only taking 1 alert per month, yeah, you may have 100 alerts. Just pick one semi-randomly each month that hasn't been reviewed in a long time. Maybe you can get 2 a month if you're feeling ambitious. So don't make it a big deal, but go through and look at your alerts every so often and say, is this alert still current? I have found alerts that clearly had not worked in over 8 years and was still in the Splunk infrastructure trying to run, but they would never find it because they use 3-digit Windows event codes. Now, those of you who don't know Windows, 3-digit Windows event codes are long gone. It's all 4-digit event, 4 and 5-digit event codes now. And that is how you can write the fine manual. Next slide. Comments? Since everyone was so quiet.
There's a lot of good ideas there. I took notes. I wanted to build on the thing about entitlement. That's so good because like one time if you call up Splunk support, like normally I submit things, but you know, if things are really going south and you want immediate attention, you call in. The first thing they ask for is the entitlement number. And when it was like 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm like, oh God, you know, I don't know what it is. You know, I work for a big company, like too bad. I'm like, oh, you're kidding me, you know, click. I'm like, oh my God, where is this number? You know, you're bleary eyed. Where is it? So that's actually a great thing to have written down.
Yeah. Always assume that your documentation is going to be read at 2 in the morning.
Yep. Do other people have any comments or questions for Mark?
Mark, I found some of this resonates with me in my practice over here. Especially, I loved the slide about the notes, and that nowhere on there we saw it said write documentation. I stole it. I took a shot of it. I'm going to steal it. Let you know now.
Feel free. Feel free.
Yeah, I particularly like the idea of document first. I came from an organization where one manager just insisted documentation first. Then the new organization is like totally disoriented and just adding, because we use code to add alerts. So anybody can just put in code and add alert.
Oh.
And, throw a lot of things off. And the other idea I like particularly is that this whole, even say 1 per month, that's that approach actually gave me some comfort. I don't know how I'm going to implement that, but at least I know, okay, well, being ambitious is not the approach. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can play game, and in the comments there was some talk about adding into the documentation references to the prior history, or the flip side of that, and sorry, I misunderstood your question at first, was adding into the alert body a link to the documentation. I actually add to the alert body a link to the documentation. But yeah, the documentation can easily point to your tickets that have fired that alert. Maybe it's a pre-built ServiceNow or Jira query. So these kind of cross references are really good.
Yeah, Mark, to add on to that, Confluence has the ability to do a short link.
Mm-hmm.
for a page, and we've started to make the habit of including the short link as a comment in the query.
I hadn't thought of that. I usually just put in how the notification mechanism, so the comment or description or whatever gets included in the ticket generated by the alert. Now, the other thing I've done, now this is NIST specific. Those of you who work in the government world and have to worry about NIST SB 800-53, auditors will always ask, show me which alerts relate to this control and this control family. So I created a custom alert action to annotate my alerts, where it's recorded as an attribute in the savesearches.com, alert.annotate.control and alert.annotate.family. So it's very easy to do via GUI or config file. And then I have dashboards within it. But you could create a similar alert action, custom alert action, to annotate the documentation. And then you can even use REST commands to pull it. And that's why I use a custom alert action, so that I can use REST commands to present. These are the active alerts and the documentation.
Cool.
I actually have 2 comments about the conference short link. So first, we use Isinga, and Isinga has this concept. Actually, it's not just Isinga. Actually, it is Isinga. Sorry, has this concept of action URL. So if your alerting system has that, use that, and whoever is interacting with that system will have an easy way to get access to that particular document. Second is short URL actually is subject to change when you change your title. So that's one downside. Conference specifically use the page ID. So try to find that page ID instead. So I use page ID.
Yeah, I've used page ID URLs. I've used long URLs. It's if you have Confluence and you put in a non-alpha character, then the URL in Confluence translates automatically to the page ID URL.
Cool. I thought the idea of documenting known issues, of course, I feel like that would be all we'd be doing, but I think that maybe the ones that were especially troublesome is interesting, because usually we use Slack, and that's the first thing I'm like, I think we've seen this like a year ago, right? And you're trying to find the exact search, like, wait, didn't we discuss this? But I like that idea of, and we have Jira too, and you can search for Jira also, but I like that maybe, things that have been especially painful to document, known issues and the fix. It's an interesting.
I mean, if you think about the old back when support, not just one, but everyone's support was good. Every ticket, if they had more than a few people calling in on a ticket, they'd create an internal KB article for it. And then the next person to call in would likely find that the service rep would find that KB and say, oh, this is what's worked for other customers. That's what you're trying to recreate here.
Yeah. Definitely. And also, I also second the regular health check, because we're a big shop, and we work with PS, and they help us craft a lot of alerts because we have a lot of instances. But yeah, and like sometimes they're based on Splunk logs, and then Splunk changes the logs, and then we realize, oh my gosh, this would never have caught it because they changed some wording or whatever information there, and so we were not catching the error. It's been why didn't we catch it? Oh, because the logs changed. So that's a great idea to do the review.
Yeah.
Yep. This is an interesting talk. Have you thought about giving it at Conf?
I have not yet, actually. It's this is a soapbox that I've had for many years. The structure of the service run book is one that evolved because I used to be, before I was did a lot of Splunk many years ago. I was primarily a system administrator, and I started thinking about what would I want documented if I was taking over infrastructure. And then I talked to some other sysadmins who were more senior than I was and said, what would you want? And it took everything everyone suggested, and I turned it into a single format. Then I started using it as a security consultant, going from shop to shop to shop to document my Splunk infrastructure. And I had only one shop that ever said, we want something added to that documentation. And they were the ones that were FDA impacted. They wanted me to add to my system list 2 columns. And that I took one look at what they wanted added, and I said, that's legitimate. I see why you need that. So, but yeah, no, I hadn't thought about it, but it's one of those, you don't think about this because it really does apply beyond Splunk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, Picklewick, agreed.
Yeah, no, it's good to document because you think oh, it's obvious, but it isn't obvious to other people. Definitely. There was something else I was going to say. Yeah, I've forgotten now. Any other thoughts people had?
Yeah, like for me, actually, the formatting is also very important. Like sometimes people unnecessarily bold the things or forget the bold of the things, and don't write like 3-4 lines. Maybe try to write a bullets, because if it is a paragraph or something, if it is everything is there, I lost interest to read all the documents, because whenever the alert comes, whenever you are in the incident, you have to solve the issue. You want to catch the line, which is a very important thing. So formatting is also, I think, very important. The other thing is, like, if we have like hundreds of documents, whatever the repository is there, it should be very good to searchable. That is also very important. Like if alert comes up, or if any new string I need to search it, it should be like good grab or something. And sometimes like in the formatting, I found that's good in the block wise, like pull down thing. Like if I write the command output, like what we call as drop down, that is also very helpful. So formatting is also very important, I believe. Yeah.
So when it comes to the alert, the trick that I use is I always include the documentation in the alert message. So there's no, what's the documentation for this alert? It's always there. So it gets into the ticket, it gets into the initial notice, it's immediately there. Now for known issues, yeah, ServiceNow has some ways to organize. They now add tags, so you can add tagging. Confluence supports labels as tags. I'm a big fan of tagging and labeling, but also in keywords. Now, when it comes to the formatting, I took a page out of O'Reilly, and I just used the standard O'Reilly book formatting, which makes it much more consistent. So if it's a literal, it's then it's bold. If it's variable, it's italics. And then I make sure to be very consistent across the formatting. But that's part of that improve notes section. I don't want people writing the documentation that first pass to worry too much about that. Someone else can come along behind them and fix it up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another thing I thought was good was the architecture diagram with the ports. I feel like that's, otherwise people just talk about it and you're like, wait, and I think we have one, that's incredibly valuable. And then as you discover things, wait a second, we're also using this port, like that's not on the diagram. So, yeah, definitely.
I agree, Becky. A great architecture diagram is worth its weight in gold. Yeah.
One of my alerts, in order to understand what the alert means, I have to include an architecture diagram of how email flows into the organization. Because you can't understand what the alert is telling you without that architecture diagram.
Right.
It's that convoluted an alert. It's literally saying, we had something that was flagged as possibly malicious by this step in the email flow, pass through these next 3 layers that all do malware scanning. And this step, which is our last step that's doing the monitoring, still allowed that email through. We need a human to check this out.
Right. Yeah. Cool, cool. You've definitely given us some good ideas and things on our to-do list. I know that I'm thinking, yeah, I have some alerts of like the runbook to TBD, and I realize those TBDs have been there for a while. So it's, maybe something I should review.
Mhm.
Definitely. Let's see what else. Oh yeah. Sink or swim, right? Go away. Yeah. See if they can do it. Yeah. Cool.
And yeah, that is the standard. Can the documentation be done without someone else there?
Yeah, definitely. Alrighty. Well, this was very helpful, and I loved this talk. And I'm hoping more people in the community will also want to give talks. But I really appreciate Mark jumping in and giving this talk at the very last minute. So it's very useful. And thanks everybody. I hope everyone has great holidays, whatever you're celebrating, and everyone gets time off from work.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Becky, for getting this.
Sure thing. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.